So I've come to realize that I'm not as far along as I hoped, thought, aspired to be. And that's okay. I think the immediate reaction to something like that is negative. Like, oh man, that stinks. You're not as far along as you thought you should be, or you haven't grown or developed or evolved or whatever. That there's something like lacking in that. And I get that completely. And I'd be lying if I didn't say I didn't have that sensation when I started to realize this. But I think the more important takeaway of it is that to have the ability to recognize that in and of itself is a huge positive, right? So you got to look at it consistently and objectively. Are there negatives? Sure. We'd all like to be better. If we could be better, better is better by definition. But the realization that you're not better says, A, you have a more honest, clearer view of yourself, which is a good thing. And related to that, B, you actually have a better chance now of getting there. And, let me stop being abstract for a second. Very specifically, what this looks like and means for me is I realized recently how much my ego is still in control and at play. Not to the level it used to be, but more so than I thought it was. I've been doing this podcast now for a few months, since November. So, going on maybe almost 6 months. When I objectively step back and look at my actions, just look at my actions, look at the behaviors I have, the patterns of thinking, the habits, etc., it becomes very clear to me how much my ego is still in charge. How often in a conversation, after a conversation, when getting ready to post something, sharing something, how much I am controlled by the thought of what other people might think, which ultimately comes back to my own ego, right? Which ultimately comes back to me trying to protect or keep up some facade of what I am, of trying to cover up some insecurity that I'm worried might be exposed. How often I post something and almost religiously throughout the day will check to see who liked it, how many likes did it get, just constantly checking how many listens is the podcast up to, how many likes did the social media post get, how many comments or views did my YouTube video get. And in some way, it's such a funny thing because in some ways it's logic. Like, that's what makes this so hard. It's logical, right? I'm doing something, I'm posting things, I'm sharing things out. It makes sense to track and see how many people are listening. And that's true if it was just for that, to be like, hey, informationally, I just want to know, how am I doing here? But it's not that. I know what it is. I know what it feels like. There's a much deeper sense and need of like, I wish more people liked it. I wish more people were listening. When it does boost up, when an episode does get a ton of listens or a post does get a bunch of likes, it makes me feel so much better. When it doesn't, I feel worse. So there's a logic to it that I would look at that. But it's also like, it's so crazy because as I talk about it now, it's like I said, it's so obvious when I look at my behaviors and actions and thought patterns, etc. But in the moment, I genuinely did not think it. And it's weird because I knew I was constantly checking. I knew it was impacting my feelings. Like, in a weird way, I knew all those things, but at the same time, I did not know them at all. It did not connect the dot in my mind at all that there's a problem there, that ego's at play. And that's fascinating to me because for all the thinking I do about thinking, for all the thinking I do about how to have better perspective and to try and be more authentic and true to yourself and not let other people kind of dictate how you act and how you think, it's still happened. And I mean, TBD if I can do anything about it. Now that I know, I hope I can and I think I can. But it's just, this thing's real, man. This thing is real. This need to constantly be challenging your own mind. And I guess it somewhat gets to, it's easy when it's easy, it's hard when it's hard, right? I think I fell into that a little bit. I was feeling like my ego was more in check. I was feeling like I had more control over myself and my thoughts and my beliefs, and I wasn't letting outside influences direct them as much. And that's true. I think there was progress made on that. But it got to a point where it started feeling easy. Like, yeah, I got this. And that's the problem, right? It's hard when it's hard. And that's the test. If you're not, it's almost like I might butcher this, but I think it works. There's a saying in poker where it's like if you don't spot the whatever the person that's getting hustled, right? If you don't spot the mark within the first however long, then you're probably the mark. There's something in that that's related to this, because if you don't spot those instances where it's hard and your ego's popping up and you got to step up and address it and try and get better, well, then it's happening and you just don't know it, right? The idea that, well, no, it's not popping up because it's not happening. I'm all good, which is kind of where I was. Whew, that's some shit that we tell ourselves that makes us feel good. But somewhere deep down, we know that's not true, right? And my thing was, I started thinking a lot more about like, hey, why am I not happier? Like, I still have plenty of moments, and it's not to say we should be happy all the time, but I still have plenty of moments where like I can't explain why I'm not happy. I still have these moments of like dread or stress or anxiety and angst, and seemingly like they shouldn't be there, but I found myself still having them. So it forced me to, much in that same vein, be like, well, something's wrong. There's something hard about this. Something's happening here. What is it? And it was only through that I even started to explore more and think and be like, oh, maybe it's this obvious thing that I'm obsessed with tracking how much people are validating the work I'm doing. And my whole mood, or at least a good portion of it, is dependent on that. It was only when I got to that point. But prior to that, like I buried that so deep that it just felt like everything was going pretty good. Like no issues here. And that's the trick, man. I'm noticing that more and more in the conversations I have. That litmus test that you need to put forth, among many, right? You should do a lot of things. You should talk to a lot of different people, get different perspectives, regularly challenge yourself, all that. But if you don't find yourself running into regular, whatever regular is for you, maybe it's once a day, maybe it's once a week, right? Whatever the right cadence is, but regularly running into instances where you're like, fuck, this is hard, this feels impossible, I feel shitty, my ego's kicking in and I don't know why, something feels unnatural, I'm not comfortable where this is going. If those things aren't happening regularly, you're not doing it right. Now, that's not to say every time it happens, it's because there's some issue you have to address or there's something wrong with you. Sometimes just bad shit happens. Sometimes we just feel discomfort and that's just life. Sometimes it's brought upon by somebody else, whatever, right? But inevitably, some of those times are shit you could handle and deal with. So if you're not spotting them, that just means you're not spotting them. Doesn't mean they're not there.